Actually,
Yeah,
Like,
I'd take one too.
okay.
Good evening, Oriole Nation, and welcome to our special board meeting.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll get started. I'm going to call the order a special meeting of Board of Education District of North Fauquier today on Monday, April 29th at 5:28 p.m. When we're ready, we can do roll call.
All right. Geckerman.
Here.
Hawk.
Here.
Matthew. Here. Gager.
All right, the quorum. And our next item is public notification of meeting.
So notice was posted on the district office, the FSC, BAM, Horseman, and the village.
Start with our pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we can then begin our only item on today's special board meeting, their presentation. So welcome.
Mike, you're back, and I don't know if you're going to start off and Marie needs to say anything, but.
Well, I wasn't sure. I feel bad. I thought you were just going to be a second with the waters, but maybe I'll just set a couple of general comments before we get into specifically the presentation. But we've been talking more and more with school districts around the state. Everything starts with operating referendums anymore. It's, I mentioned at a call with Wauwatosa, they're kind of balancing their operational needs with this originally planned for facilities, and this, the way things are working out, the operational is taking a little bit higher priority. So you're not alone in this conversation, and I think this is the way it's going to be. We're not anticipating any significant changes coming out of Madison that would alter the need to consider operational referendums. So it's just kind of a way of life, I think, right now. So, did you want to
Say anything before we get started, or?
No, I'll jump in when the budget part starts.
Sure.
I don't know what you've covered so far, but.
Just general, I haven't
Okay.
had to start, so.
Okay.
So as far as the agenda, there it is. We're just gonna, a couple of general school finance 101 type things. This is a reminder. We'll talk a little bit about trends, locally, statewide, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about North Fond du Lac School District. So if you go to the thirds, one more, right there. Just as a reminder, School Revenue Limit Authority, revenue limit went in 92, 93. It was based on your prior year expenditures, and that determined your per pupil amount that you started revenue limits with. And there's a couple ways to impact that. Revenue limit is more kids or more money per kid. And that's where the operating question comes in. So revenue limit is made up of aid and property taxes. There are some districts who Beloit that skews very heavily towards aid, and then you have your districts like Gibraltar, which gets literally zero aid because of the property values being so high. You're more kind of in the middle of that range, but it's your district membership, the 3-year rolling average, your per pupil amount. Again, like I mentioned, it was the initial number was based on your 91, 92 expenditure levels for certain expenditures, not all. So if, it didn't include like grant. So if the grant was paying for those expenses, those weren't added to your per pupil. And so if you're a lower spending district, you started with a lower number. If you're a higher spending district, you started with a higher number. Plus exemptions. And there are various ones: transfer of service. If you have a high needs student, move into the district, you can claim transfers and get dollars to help cover the cost of that type of need. The biggest one is the operating referendum, both recurring and non-recurring, the two types. The recurring is you ask for an amount and you can phase it into a higher. So you can say, well, we want $100 the first year forever, another $100 making it $200 total, the second year forever. We've seen different combinations of things as far as recurring in terms of districts trying to meet the increasing needs that they might have, meaning in year 4, the need might be higher than in year 1. And then there's the non-recurring, which has let me finish up the recurring. So that recurring it shows up on your revenue limit worksheet as a dollar amount the first year. And then the second year, they take that dollar amount and divide it by the number of students you have. And that adds to your per pupil. And that stays there. It's there permanently. Now, if your enrollment goes up, you actually get more than that initial amount. If your enrollment goes down, you could potentially end up getting less than that initial amount. Because you're in this formula right here. Membership times per pupil, the exempt plus the exemption equals your total revenue limit. The non-recurring does not add to your per pupil. It's a stated dollar amount. So you ask for a specific dollar amount per year. You could ask for the same amount for 5 years. You could ask for your amount increasing. And I know some of you know this already, but it'd be good to just kind of review. But at some point, that authority goes away. It could be 1 year, it could be 100 years. But whatever, at some point, that goes back down to 0. And that's what the district currently has. So the majority of districts use the non-recurring. Probably about 2/3. They pass at a better rate. It gives you an opportunity to kind of revisit your need. Meaning because sometimes people might think if you ask for recurring, problem solved forever. It's not. Appleton gone for, while I was working at Appleton School District, we asked for 1 recurring, and they've gone 3 or 4 more recurring since then. For large, so the issue doesn't go away with a recurring. It has to be communicated clearly, because it might not be 2 years from now, but it might be 7 years from now that number no longer works, depending on what the state does and the enrollmental cost. So that per pupil, we'll talk about this. The low revenue limit ceiling did go up in this last biennium budget from $10,000 to $11,000. And that helps a lot of districts who are in that situation. Green Bay was one. And so there was definitely an effort in the budget to kind of help the lower spending districts and kind of move them up more. We don't anticipate seeing that increase again, or at least not that size. That's the largest increase we've seen in the low revenue limit ceiling in 1 year. Other years, they may have phased it in. You may have gone from, they've gotten an additional $500 1 year, another $500 the next year, something like that. I did create a situation where, because that first year, whatever new dollars you get in your revenue limit, the first year is all tax levy. Because you don't get aid, but, I did say that your revenue limit is made up of aid and tax levy, but your aid is based on your previous year's expenditures. So if you're a positive district, you don't get the aid on those new expenditures until year 2, the year after you spend them. So there were several districts who maybe had, a bit of a jump. I know Green Bay did in terms of their levy to take on that 11,000. There were other districts who maybe were doing additional levy in Fund 39. That's one of the advantages of doing that extra levy in Fund 39. They stopped doing the extra Fund 39 levy because they were taking on a higher Fund 10 levy. So those types of things do come with, trust me, nobody who got 11,000 is disappointed they got it, but you might have to manage a few things in terms of tax levy and things to take that on. And then on the revenue limit formula itself, $325 per pupil increase for the biennium budget plus 400 years. That means as the budget was approved, $325 will be added every year to that per pupil amount, which for a lot of districts means you'll get more money. Now, if you're a declining enrollment district, which you're not, so it's all the time, but potentially you're just offsetting what you might be getting in the declining enrollment exemption, so the net benefit isn't necessarily there. Now, there is a lawsuit going on challenging, because the extra 400 years came about by the governor's veto, and how he went about it. People are challenging whether he actually has the ability to do that. And so we'll see if that actually goes anywhere. But here's historically, back up to 2007, 2008, the increases per pupil that the state budget has given. It was in the 264, 275, 200 for a couple of years. When Act 10 came in, it actually went down. Now there were some offsetting expenditures. Obviously, the employee half of retirement would be something they had to cover. So there was some built-in reductions in budgets to help offset the fact that revenue limits actually went back. And then you can see some smaller amounts. The other thing that came in about that same time is categorical aid. This is that other aid that comes from the state, which doesn't impact your tax levy because it's dollars directly from the state that you can use for expenditures. They started increasing that area when some of these smaller ones weren't here. So I did want to make note of that. But the idea when revenue limits were put in place is that that increase per student would reflect CPI essentially. And it would increase, and it did probably the first 6 or 7 years before it started to lag a little bit. But historically, here are the increases, and obviously we do have 24, 25, which is next year through 25, because that is what the budget states. The zeros in 21, 22, and 22, 23, that was because of the ESSER funds school districts received. So all that federal funding, the state said, well, we don't need to give you money because you're getting all this money from the federal government. Now, if you do the math over those 4 years,
Which you couldn't use for staffing, just so you know, other than adding like a coach or a new position. Just making that statement.
yeah, it had some restrictions.
Yeah.
And how you utilize the dollars. And it varied by district too, because it's also based on your income level of the school district essentially. Some districts receive more money, some districts receive less. There's still some districts, basically, have used it all up. Some districts have some dollars are carrying over into 24, 25. They just have to spend them by September 30th of 24. So really, every district was a little different. I think most districts, some bought some things to improve environment, some facility things you could purchase if it was in a certain parameters, supplemental staff for learning loss, those types of things. So again, going back to the idea that this per pupil was designed for the revenue limits, was designed to keep pace with inflation. The Legislative Fiscal Bureau put out a memo, and this next chart kind of shows what kind of occurred by not keeping up with inflation. If you could go one more slide. Yeah. So the brown or yellowish, mustard yellow, is the actual increase. The green is the inflation index. And if that increase is going back to 2013, we didn't go back further because with that year of Act 10 in there, it kind of throws you off a bit. We just thought it'd be cleaner because the number was actually higher, the shortfall or what the number would have been if it would have been CPI. It would have been higher if we went back more years, but we just went back to 2013. So again, the yellow is the actual increase. The green is the inflation index, what it would have been with inflation. So you can see going back those years, it's lagged. And per pupil, amount on average around the state would be about $2,300 higher for every district. So if you take that 2,300 times your 3-year average, pretty considerable amount.
Like 3.5.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, obviously districts who've been growing rapidly, there are a few, and there's still a few who don't use their full revenue limit. When Hudson was growing so fast, the revenue was going up so fast, they weren't spending their full. Now their enrollment's starting to flatten out. Now they're using not quite all of it, but in probably another 5 years, they'll be using 100%. You saw other situations where that might be the case. And then you also see some districts who, it's kind of their identity, we're not going to tax you fully. And that's the approach that they've taken. Even those districts, Camelsport used to be one, they've kind of moved away from that approach. So again, this is, one of the causes, or this is the deviation from how revenue limits were originally supposed to work and basically what the outcome is. If you go back further years, that number's, 3,000 plus. But again, we just wanted to illustrate, or using the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, using their chart to illustrate that lagging inflation, and it's definitely this last, couple of years, because of the much higher inflation that we haven't seen in a long time, is really magnifies this problem. So historically, and again, this is not tied to your district, it's just a generic chart. This is kind of, like I said, we've been talking to a lot of districts about this. We've put together some generic slides just to illustrate points. This is one of them. The expenditures are kind of the purple maroon color, revenues in the gray. So your revenue limit is a lighter gray, and then the bluish gray is other revenues. District gets some other state categorical aid, grants, those types of things, interest income, fees, dues. But obviously the bulk of the dollars come from the revenue limit. And then you can see that the ESSER funds kind of plugged some of that, added additional revenues, but at a time where expenditures were going up quite a bit. And what happened is that the higher cost inflation increased expenditures. The school districts as a whole, school districts lost the ESSER aid because it was temporary money, and the dollars that were replacing it from the state level didn't even replace the ESSER funds, much less take into account any sort of increase on top of that. Which leads to the next slide, dependency on operational referendum. We have a couple of slides on this topic. Districts with at least 10% of their revenue limit, which again is probably 80–85% of most school districts' revenues, are again, at least 10% are tied to non-recurring operating referendums. So in 2024, 100 school districts in the state, so 23-24 school year, have 10% of or more of their operating budget tied to a non-recurring operating question. And again, for the non-recurring means you have to go back to the voters. If the voters would say no, these 100 districts would have to, maybe they could blow off fund balance for a while, but 10% at least of their budget would have to be reduced to balanced budget.
What's our revenue limit now?
Our per pupil revenue limit?
It's your revenue limit calculation. Let's see.
I didn't see it in that tray.
Well, your Fund 10 budget is 21, almost 23, $21.8 million budgeted expenditures for 23-24.
Right.
So your revenue limit is probably what, 18? to 19 million, no, maybe 20 million.
Yeah.
And then your current operating referendum is $800,000.
So what's the typical, I mean, what's the average percent that people use of their revenue limit in a referendum typically? I mean, we got 10% in here, do they go to the bare minimum 10 or are most of them?
No, well, this is at least 10. There are some on here over 50% of their revenue limit is made up of White Lake, which is a small district, kind of the middle of the state, northern central Wisconsin, a lot of lake property, few kids, a lot of vacation homes, and a lot of the big tax bills go to Illinois. So they vote in referendums fairly regularly. So I think they're the highest. It's over 50% of their revenue limit authority is tied to a non-recurring. Of the 100 that are over 10%, there's probably 60 that are over 20%.
And our revenue limit's 18 or 19, something like
It's about 20.
20,
Can you add that to that chart? For those, like a line on what the revenue limit is?
oh, on our budget? Yeah, we can add a line on the budget model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To show the revenue limit calculation. So yeah, so there are, and there's probably 20 to 30 that are over 30% in terms of their revenue limit made up tied to non-recurring operating referendums. There's a lot at 15 to 20, probably the biggest bubble. So I don't necessarily have an average for you, because I think you have to take into account the characteristics of the districts. And then you also have to take into account, it's not reflected in this, the districts have asked for recurring operating referendums, so they've gone to the voters. You saw Verona, Middleton, these are growing districts that went for some very large recurring operating questions that aren't reflected in this. This slide was kind of, this slide was kind of represent the precarious situation districts are in terms of needing to get that continued support. And the growth and the dependency of non-recurring operating. You can see back in 2014, there was only 36 school districts that had 10% of their revenue limit authority tied to a non-recurring. In 23-24, it's 100, and I think after this April, which this is not reflect, the numbers over 100, I'm sure. So the growth, because the typical sequence is the district will start out with an amount, and working with the district, but they renewed at the same level, and they renewed right before the inflation took off, so a couple more years to get through their current non-recurring, which is coming up a little short, before they feel comfortable going back to the voters for a higher amount, which I think they'll ultimately do. So it's a growing issue. Like I said in my opening comments, we spend, I work on referendums and issuing bonds. That's what I get paid to do. But we're having, every conversation starts with this. Not every, but the majority of conversations, vast majority of conversations start with, and if they don't bring it up, we ask the question, oh yeah, you want to issue this debt, but how's your operating budget looking? Are you going to go to the voters? Is that potentially something? And I was talking to the district today, and I said, the operational probably should, if you're looking at November and you're weighing both, and you think it's iffy, is asking the facility with the operating the best route to go. So the next slide kind of shows number of school districts who have asked operating questions since 1990. The darker blue are the new districts who just passed this April. So that's, again, I don't remember the percentages for those, but you can see that, 362 school districts have asked, and some have asked multiple times, like I mentioned, Appleton. I think they've had at least 4 recurring operating questions, and they've been successful. There are some communities where it's just more difficult, but there's some districts that if they had not passed their operating question, one in April, and one a year ago, the one a year ago was already in a negative fund balance situation. Now the voters did support and they are building their fund balance back up. But there's another one I worked with that if the voters hadn't, they would have had to change their programming to the degree that the school district would have looked nothing like it does today, next year. Or there would have been negative fund balance. And we're having those types of conversations more and more. But still, not a huge number of districts in that situation, but there are definitely more districts trending that direction. So, but you can just see how widespread, and when revenue limits were put in place, legislators said, if you want more money, you go to your voters. And that's what districts have done. And so that's the next slide. This gives a little history of the types of referendums. If you look, ID in this chart is issued debt, NR is non-recurring, RR is recurring operating. And you can see the bluish color is the pass, and the purplish maroon color is the fail. Or do I have it backwards? Yeah, the bluish is the pass. What happened to there should be a footnote on that. No, it's not there, I checked.
Okay.
So you can see that the success rates have varied. Definitely in the last, since 23, 24, the passage rates haven't been as high as they have been in previous years. Combination of things, I think the economy, COVID, a lot of things, confusion over all the federal money that schools were given, kind of created some confusion, I think maybe with some people in terms of the needs of the districts. But it's a pretty significant number, and one of the reasons there's more, I should clarify, in the even years, you'll see like in 20, 22, 24, in odd years, there's no fall elections. There's no August, which nobody uses anyway, in November elections. So that's why the numbers are higher in those years. Because you have some districts use February, not many, but typically April and November are the big ones. But again, in odd years, there is no November, so you don't have as many opportunities. And November historically is for school districts as a whole, Wisconsin had the highest passage rates. So the bigger turnout dates tend to have a higher success rate. So I could start on the forecast model, but before we get into that, are there any questions kind of on the general trends around the state? Revenue limits, referendum. Obviously, I know the district has done through the operating referendum process before, but that would be good just to review some of that. Anything before we move on to the model? So this next slide, and Maria can talk to kind of the assumptions that went in here, but this is a slide from the Baird forecast model. I think there's about over 200 districts are using it this year. One thing we've seen is the growing need to better understand operating budgets in terms of what's happening in the future. More and more districts are using a model to help kind of forecast that. So you put in some assumptions, mainly around growth, enrollment growth, state assumptions around aid. I think the model does reflect the 325 every year additional per pupil going forward through 28, 29. It does reflect growing enrollment for the district. most districts in the state are declining enrollment. But we're even seeing districts that are growing enrollment, facing some budget challenges going forward. It projects the tax rate about 2/3 of the way down. You'll see that it says levy and tax rate, and you can see in 25, 26 that the levy drops. And a big part of that is related to your current operating falling off. And there's not an operating, a replacement for that 800,000. You can see that non-recurring amount down a bit.
And just speaking to the levy, I just want to point out that 24-25, I have built in there a $500,000 over levy in Fund 39. I don't have what it would be on this budget forecast. I don't have what it would be if I didn't put that 500,000 in there, but I can get that. But I'm just trying to build up that mill rate so that it's not as much of a shock then when we add the referendum. So just kind of creeping that up.
So yeah, so just mathematically, you'd be about the same level, take that $500 as you were for the current year. So the levy would be essentially.
You put 500 into what year?
24-25.
So you can see how in 23-24, it went from 6,570,000 to just over 7 million, roughly about a 500,000-ish increase. And that's an additional levy within Fund 39, which is optional. So if you take that out, you'd be about the same total levy in 24-25 as you are in 23-24. And then you can see a decrease after that.
There's still, I don't know how deep we want to get into this today, but I'm confused on a few things. I guess one question quick on down on the bottom on that non-recurring for 800,000, is that included in the line a couple down below where it's the referendum debt levy? That 800 is part of that number?
No, they're separate. The referendum debt levy is just Fund 39 debt. The 800 is a different levy.
So that 800 is in, like when you do that summary for each budget year, that general operations levy, that 800,000 is in that number?
It's in Fund 10.
Yeah. And so the levy falls in 25-26 because the 800,000 falls off, and then also the debt service levy drops as well.
So
Which we did intentionally to kind of mirror when your operating was falling off with the potential of having the need to renew it.
so that's 1.4 roughly falling off, right?
Yes, yep.
So, again, I don't know how far we want to go here, but up in the Fund 10 revenues from 24-25 to 25-26, revenues dropped 352,000.
Yep, some of that is going to be because of that non-recurring referendum falling off. And there's also ESSER falling off. Actually, ESSER falls off in 24-25, but most of that's gonna be that 800,000 falling off.
So that 800,000 is part of the revenue
Right.
Yeah.
in the Fund 10.
Right.
Yeah, so there's 800,000 operating referendum falling off, and then you have, this shows increasing enrollment, so you're getting a little enrollment, and then it also reflects the $325 more per pupil you're getting on your rolling average. So that's why the drop isn't the full 800,000. because you're gaining some of that back because of increased enrollment and more per student. But even with it, it's not fully replacing the 800,000, that growth in per pupil. This isn't there.
And so why does so our revenue limit would still be going up every year a little bit probably, right? Assuming.
Yeah, probably it's better reflected in the future years where the ESSER funds have kind of cleared out. But yes, with increasing enrollment, because you see up at the top, that September membership, that reflects increasing. So that means if you go back to that formula, the number of students you're multiplying that per pupil amount by is increasing.
Right.
Now it's a 3-year rolling average. So for each new student you get, the first year you only get 1/3 credit, and then 2/3 the second year, and a full student the third year. And that's why you do see that trending upwards in terms of your Fund 10 revenues. Is because of those two factors, the 325 and increasing enrollment.
So the tax levy is based on that revenue limit, right? I mean, you can go up to that revenue limit.
Theoretically, yes. Yeah, it depends on the fluctuations, your property value, where you're at in the aid formula. In terms of, the more aid you get, the less taxpayers pay to equal your revenue limit. So for every additional dollar in aid is $1 less in tax levy, and vice versa. $1 less in aid is $1 increase in tax levy.
So in 25, 26, that 5.3, is that the max we could levy based on the revenue limit, or is that, how is that number calculated?
It's the model calculates your revenue limit, and we put in variables to kind of try to predict what your state aid is going to be, and then we subtract that. And then the balance for Fund 10 is your Fund 10 levy, and then we also add in your levy for debt service, and we add in any levy you might have for Fund 80 for your total tax, which is relatively
It's like 200,000.
So basically your revenue is calculated, we subtract your estimated state aid, which is an estimate, because we know that next year, this upcoming year, they're gonna be putting more money into the aid pot, because it's in the budget. But after that year, we don't know exactly how many dollars they're gonna put into the aid pot, so that's really a variable. But so again, revenue limit minus your state aid, plus your Fund 39 levy, plus your Fund 80 levy equals the district's levy.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm asking this right, but so that 5.3 is the max we could levy, given.
Correct, yeah, without getting additional authority from the voters.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, and again, it's a projection. We think we're a little conservative, but you never know, because, from an aid standpoint, since we're talking about that, because you're growing enrollment, even though you have good valuation growth, you're in a better situation in the aid formula, because your value behind each student isn't increasing as much as a district that has increasing values and declining enrollment. Because the whole idea of the aid formula is the more property value you have behind each student, the less support you need from the state, from an aid standpoint. And so we think you're in a good, if these enrollments hold compared to the rest of the state, because 85 to 90% of districts in the state are declining or flat, you're in a better aid situation. So we do think this is a touch conservative, but again, we don't know exactly what they're going to come up with. Now, the state did make a kind of a renewed commitment to the 2/3 funding. That lasted probably about 9-10 years the first time they did that. How long it lasts this time will depend on the revenues that they generate.
So how do we determine What's the process to determine what's the correct amount to go ask for?
Well, I'll talk in general terms and I'll let you address. We just did a webinar, I don't know if the two of you are on there, on districts kind of going through a process. Because a lot of districts struggle even getting started even, because they do these, but they see the negative numbers, the red numbers is not what you want to see. So those are showing some pretty significant deficits. And what we suggest and what we did on this webinar is kind of talk districts through the process. I think there was 90 some districts. Which again reflects kind of where districts are at from a budget standpoint. And part of it is what district you are. There are certain parts of the state, Dane County-ish, that kind of put something on the ballot and just feel pretty good about their chances. There are other parts of the state that aren't quite as fortunate. Although McFarland was a district in that Madison area that didn't pass this last time. So districts will go through various levels of internal review to see where can we make some adjustments in our budget to kind of right size some things. Especially in a declining enrollment district where, there's people read in the paper school district enrollment down again, they just assume, well, you're going to be able to cut. Well, if you lose 20 students over a district of 3,000 students, you're not getting rid of a teacher most likely because your classroom went from 24 to 23, those types of things. But I think it's important that districts kind of go through that process, and I know you have here. So we'll talk about that in a minute to kind of evaluate what they can do to kind of reduce costs in some areas. And then it comes down to, for people, what do you want the school district to provide? What does the community want? What are the expectations of the district and what does it take to meet those expectations? You could balance this and have 35, 38 kids in the classroom. But I don't think the community, much of the community would be very happy with that choice to balance the budget that way. So it's kind of generally we say, you should do that self-evaluation to see if there's some things you can do differently, maybe, increase revenues by reducing open enrollment out, those types of things. So there's, this does the math based on the assumptions. Then the district kind of has to say, okay, of that deficit of in 25, 26 of $1.9 million, what can we do within our own budget to bring that number down? And then you make the determination, okay, what do we need to do to provide the education that we feel is appropriate? What do we need to get back to that level? All right, is it realistic? Yeah, because you've been using the 800,000 and that's part of your process. So kind of at a minimum, that's what you need to replace, but we just don't see districts keeping that amount the same. It's almost certainly to go
Well,
up.
you could go 1.4 between 24, 25, 25, 26, and the mill rate wouldn't change, right?
If that assumption is correct, then yes. Yeah.
But then I have a question right there then, but that's the forecast for 25, 26 is taking 80% of our fund balance out and plugging it into that, right?
Well, yeah, that's one thing and that's a good point. Because what's happening here is in the model, it's assuming you're still spending those dollars. And so it's adding to your aid. If you would say, okay, we're just gonna cut those, then your aid would go down, your tax rate would go up a little bit. So it's not quite as easy as taking the saying we could do 1.4 and the tax rate wouldn't go up. Because if you would cut some and you're positively aided, you get aid on that, you wouldn't get as much aid. So in general, ballpark terms, yes. But until you actually kind of run the numbers and see where you're at in the aid formula, it might fluctuate a little bit. Because this model is assuming you're spending at that level and the aid based on that expenditure level is reflected in offsetting your tax levy and lowering your tax rate. But in you're close, yes. But there's a few other variables that we want to run the numbers just to see exactly, to get a bit more
So
comfortable.
1.4 isn't enough, right?
Correct.
But 1.4, give or take, is free.
Yes, because of the drop in the debt service levy and a drop in the existing non-recurring. And again, we built your debt to try to accommodate the renewal. So yes, if you could get around that 1.4, I'm not saying that's the number, but if you could, it'd be somewhat levy neutral, is what I would call it.
But I mean, I don't think it's enough, but I'm just trying to, so do we have an idea, like, you know, what's 500, or what's every 100,000, or what's every 500,000? What does that add to the mill rate?
So that's 1.6. So if you go, I'm using 25, 26 to give you something to kind of ballpark from. So you can see that the levy is 5.3 million, and then it goes to 5.462 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that is about a $160,000 increase,
Mm-hmm.
and that results in about 7 cents. So if you multiply that by 3, that gets you to 480. That gets you to about 21 cents. So you'd be in that 22, 23, depending on valuation increase, for $500,000 roughly.
So what I'm working on right now is tightening up the budget. We're still going through staffing. I'm still working.
Flip down this next slide, is that okay?
Yeah, you definitely can. Yep, and these are some of the things that we've either already done or we're working on. As Mike pointed out, you know, we're taking a hard look at the budget and where we can reduce costs to get to the correct ask and something that is palatable to the community. So far, we have reduced 6.5 positions, and the budget impact with salaries and benefits was $550,000. So you will see that in the budget on the document that I gave you that has the 4 big cost centers: salaries, health insurance, transportation, and facilities.
Jim, I'll just roll up to that since you all have this too, okay?
Yeah, I'm just gonna be kind of flipping back and forth.
Yeah, so let's put this one up there so we can just look at their page if everyone's got
Yeah.
it with them.
So that's where you'll see that dip in 24, 25. That's where the salaries decrease, and that reflects those cuts were those due to attrition. That reduction in the salary costs.
Could you, again, put a list of what the assumptions are that go in here? I know last time we did this, you had some assumptions and it looked like they changed a little bit, but I couldn't tell exactly. So we could get a list of what the assumptions that go
Sure.
into the model.
Sure. Some of the big ones are listed here. So the salaries along with the percentage increases,
Mhm.
and the health insurance.
Yeah, it's
and
like I
those-
saw the salary went from, I think in the last model you showed us it was 3.5.
Yep, and it's about 3.42
Right.
now going across.
And the transportation went down.
Transportation is going up in 24, 25. So,
Right.
and then it will level off to about a 4% increase every year, and that's after talking with Johnson Bus
That's
last
just
week.
renegotiating.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just, Right, because last time I think you said it went to like, after the big increase, it went to like 6%.
Right. That was our old contract. We just met with Johnson Bus
Right.
last week.
Mhm.
Yeah, and.
So if we could just get what the assumptions are for all of those, then it helps me see the difference from one version to the next if assumptions change or whatever.
Sure, yeah, and I'll talk with you afterwards just to clarify exactly what you're looking for. But then the facilities cost as well those are the assumptions there, those increases. So those are all built into the expenditures, the budget forecast. And so I was getting at what I'm doing next. So the model is built, it will change. And as soon as I do budget revisions in May, we'll come up with a kind of a first answer to what the ask might be. And we have two different ways that we can go, and Mike and I and Matt talked about that. We can go for 4 years at an equal amount across every year. What that would do is it would increase that tax levy quite a bit, but then it would slowly come down. We could ask, which would be my recommendation, as long as we're using this model, the ask would match the model. So it would ask whatever that deficit is, or right around what that deficit is. So we would be asking along with whatever that need is for the year. And then the tax levy would increase appropriately, or as that ask increases. So I have been working on it, just some different scenarios. I'm just not ready with the actual budget numbers to be able to give you, this is what we should be asking for. That will probably come in, we're thinking July.
Well, I know, yeah, that's, if you want to be on the ballot, this November, which again tends to have better results as a whole. There's gonna be a lot of people on the ballot in November. Everybody's gonna be voting, so your job is just to inform. You're not gonna have to incent anybody to show up to vote. You have to pass the resolution, I think it's have it to the municipalities by August 27th. So next page. So I guess whatever timeline you think you would need to get comfortable with whatever the ask is, I would think, getting kind of something probably June, July at the latest, in terms of giving you time to kind of mull and kind of look at options and understand what went into it. So you're comfortable with resolutions, if that's where you end up, before August 27th. So I'm not sure what your meeting schedule is, those types of things. So I would, but this, to me, this is part of the conversation you have kind of on an ongoing basis up until that August month. Every month, what anything new, maybe there's nothing new that month, but maybe something with, I know you have a new healthcare consultant or whatever you call it, working on your healthcare plan. Maybe there's something that comes up as you go through the next few months and those types of things come up as part of the conversation. So it's an ongoing conversation. Say, how does this impact our budget as a whole, even though you don't necessarily have some initial estimates of what the ask might be, you just have an understanding of the variables that go into making that decision.
And some of the asks, I mean, the way she's laid it out so far, there's different ones from, we're asking for purely what we have right now. And then there's the ask of like, what this could be like, because with growing enrollment, and if we're worried about like class sizes came up a couple times here, if we want to, stay with consistent, like, 1 to 20 in K3, we have to, potentially keep adding more staff members. And right now there's two different scenarios or a couple different scenarios where if we ask for just what we have right now, we're not going to be able to meet that same class size quota, versus if we need, to keep that at 1 to 20, this is the additional ask that we might have to do, just make sure that we're still in that frame. And that's just one facet, again, one assumption as you're pointing out, Rick.
So
So
I think I understand. I guess my concern's not the right word, but I think we should be involved in this process more than we have been in the past. And, you know, making the decision to put 500,000 in to fund 39, I mean, that might be the right thing to do. I'd like to have a discussion
Yeah,
about that.
That's definitely just one
Right.
option. That isn't something that
I know, but it's in the model we're looking at, right?
Correct.
Right, so,
Correct.
I mean, we don't know that when we're looking at the model, the thing through, you know what I'm saying? And if you're thinking about adding people, let's have that discussion, but, I mean, I just don't want, well, it's my opinion, again, everybody else has their own, but I would be uncomfortable if you guys just sat in a room by yourself and came back like with this and said, here's the model, and we don't understand what's in there and what's not in there.
And I think what our task right now, Rick, is to come up with what are some of those assumptions? How can we come with, like, this is how we can save, this is what we'll, you know, potentially need, this is what it looks like if we wanted this ratio, this is what it looks like if it looks like this, and weigh in on your input, right? And see where we need to go so that we're all informed here at this table, so that we're bringing the right narrative to informing the rest of our people in this village and the community. I think the timeline, and we've talked about this in the past too, this is a draft of this. One thing that doesn't have on here is, like, we need to, I think, and we've talked about this too, is have a meeting in addition to our meetings every month so that we're getting or knocking out at least two, so we can start getting into some of those things. But on here too, we're already starting some of this process. You know, contacting our legal already, letting them know that there's an idea or conceptual idea of making that happen, to bringing Mike in today to start this process, and then getting out there and having some more conversations. But before, I think what you're saying too, Rick, is so that you feel comfortable with whatever that story is, so you can inform people.
Right, we're gonna have I'm assuming a fairly big ask. And I think we need to understand what's all in here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing going through that process, like I said, I think it becomes part of the conversation between now and August 26th. Because again, it's to the municipalities on the 27th. So
Right.
whenever you ultimately make the decision and have resolutions before you, it's not just for your own understanding, but it's also part of the conversation that, not that you draw a big crowd at your meetings, but that ongoing conversation does raise awareness within the community for those who are paying some attention.
We talked just on Friday, Matt and I, about how to get the staff on board, you know, make sure the staff understands, because they are there with students, they're with parents, just making sure that the narrative is correct. So yeah, we do plan, I mean, this group first, making sure that that's understood and then branching out.
This is stuff this district has never seen before. Even that makes people uneasy, where we're like holding back and we're holding positions based on resignation and retirement. And it creates like this, like, well, what are we doing? Why are we doing this for? That's that narrative of like, okay, we're doing this so that we can have a reasonable, or try to get in a reasonable zone for an ask at some point in time. And we're doing everything.
What's an overload? I don't know.
So an overload is if a teacher has to teach an additional class because, for example, we can't add a whole nother teacher because of cost. An overload's around $8,000 a year on another teacher's salary so that they can teach that additional class for the given year. And so we're trying to reduce that number because it does add up pretty quickly based on, you know, and that comes at a cost of like increased class size a little bit to make sure that happens. Or you change some things up versus looking at our 9-12 system. This year we're looking at it 6-12. So there are players at the 6 through 8 level that are also certified that can teach at the 9th level. And by reshifting and reallocating people, we're saving dollars by making that happen. This stuff has never happened before, but we're making and taking those steps to do that so that that ask can be as less as possible, even though it looks like we're going to have to, you know, go out there and really continue to support what we've got going on here because it's a great thing, but we can't stop at that either. So,
I have a kind of a side question. So if it's successful in November, do we get immediate use of that first year money for this particular budget that starts July 1st?
It depends on how you ask. So right now, your current operating referendum runs into next year. So with a November referendum, because I think it's on the 5th, and you have to certify, the board could approve 2 levies. One without the referendum, so in October, and then one with, and then you'd certify the one that's correct after the results are known for the referendum. Now, the question you would have is, are you going to add dollars for 24, 25 when you already have an operational referendum in place and just start it up on the following? I mean, that's for you to determine, but there is a way for you to add dollars to 24, 25 with a November referendum. Now obviously you're building the budget not knowing. So do you build the budget and you're pretty committed come November in terms of your staffing and things? If the referendum would not be successful, do you just run a deficit then if you build the budget around something assuming it would pass? Or do you not budget for maybe some non-recurring expenditures, maybe some facilities, things that you would only add back in if you were successful? So there is a way to do it, but that'd be part of your process to determine, because you do show a deficit for 24, 25, but as Maria was saying, that number might, some of these other efforts might be much more manageable than that. And then you'd have to make the determination, do we add dollars for 24, 25, or we're just gonna start in 25, 26? That's something you'd have to evaluate, but there is a way to do it.
Well, the way it is now, we'd have a fund balance of 11%. So I guess the question is, are we comfortable with, if we kept it the way it is now, are we comfortable with ending the year with 11% fund balance?
It would most likely cause us to need to short-term borrow. We're right on the bubble right now at, we were last year around 17%.
And it would, fund balance is one of the, key criteria for your credit rating. So potentially, does that mean you'd be downgraded? I'm not saying that, but it's a factor the credit rating agencies for your debt issuance really look at, and especially the trends of where's your fund balance trending. And if they see a deficit and they see a failed referendum, they'll be watching you very closely going forward, how you're going to resolve that. And it is hard to recoup fund balance once you spend it. There have been many districts who say, well, we'll just build it back up over time. More say it than do it. I'll put it that way.
Well, if we were to use it this coming year, could you do something where you take that 500 from the 139 and say the referendum passed, and you take that 500 out and put it up in the Fund 10?
Yeah.
As part of the referendum?
Yeah, so you could, yes, you could lower the Fund 39 levy, increase your Fund 10 levy, and it's the same dollar amount, it's a neutral impact. So dollar levied in Fund 39, dollar levied in Fund 10 is $1. So any trade-off there.
If you have it in your revenue limit authority to be able to do that.
No,
Right.
I mean, that would be,
Yeah, so this would mean.
if the referendum passed and you had, and you
Yeah,
wanted
then
to
you
spend
can
it this
shift it.
year to not affect the mill rate as much, you could use that referendum dollar up in 10 and take it out of
Yeah, then you
39.
can shift it.
Yeah, and again, so we would work with you how you would adopt your budgets to reflect those scenarios. We did something very similar with Green Bay a couple of years ago. And there's several districts who will be approving two budgets and then certifying a levy that reflects the result.
We had to
We
do that
did
with our
that
age.
the last time we went around too. Yes.
So,
You get just a little on, come that, in my 30 years, that fund balance has been sacred, and I understand that times change and things have to happen, but to just in 1 year, pop 80% of it out of there and.
Yeah.
And then hope that then next year, we're gonna have to wipe the rest of it out, because the deficit I see jumps tremendous and without the referendum passing.
yeah, and you have a solid fund balance. You know, I would say you're maybe around average, maybe a little bit below average around the state. You know, some much lower than you, don't get me wrong, but there's some, you know, much higher in that 25% range, or some in the 30. You know, obviously some smaller districts will have some higher percentages because, you know, $500,000 is a bigger percentage of the budget, but, yeah, it's a good fund balance. You're not cash flow borrowing, which I think is always should be the goal, but it's not robust by any means in comparison to other districts.
So I think that answers the question, if we're gonna ask to spend the money next year, right?
Well, thanks.
You can. I think it comes down to the process you're gonna go through to determine, you know, what offsets there may be to minimize that amount. And again, hypothetically, maybe you say, well, we're down to a $200,000 deficit. Maybe that's a level we're a little bit more comfortable with using fund balance, and then not starting the new referendum until the old one falls off. So that'd be part of the conversation you might have. Obviously, if you're at a larger number, and you just can't get there and you're not comfortable using fund balance, then that raises the likelihood or you'll have more discussion around whether you should start it for 24, 25.
Thank you for
A
sharing.
lot. I
Yeah,
know it's,
yeah.
we're throwing a lot
And
at
I think, again, this is this is another reason to have another monthly meeting, just so that we can dive deeper into
Yeah, I mean,
the work
that
and.
was my question on that schedule that you had up. It was like, the next thing we do is.
Yeah, that's not accurate to what the meetings will be, Rick. I think we were just putting together a quick
Yep.
draft of what it is, but I feel strongly that each month we should try to get an additional one in if we can. May's gonna be a little tight with May 20th coming around, unless we do it at the end of May after everything's done, but still feasible. And then getting into June, you know, that's not a difficult thing to do to make those two happen.
And I already know I need to push that calendar up a month. I had budget revisions happening in June, and talking with DPI today, they need budget revisions by June 10th in order to use a clean budget to project our aid, our July 1 aid estimate. So I want to meet that. I want to make sure we have a good aid estimate in there. So I'll probably be bringing those revisions to you in May, and which is what I've done every year. I was just hoping to have even more data in June. But, so everything's gonna be pushed up a month already.
This is more of a deadline calendar than an actual meeting calendar.
Correct.
In between.
This is just a base of like, here are the big
Yeah.
landmarks that we have to hit. It doesn't foretell all the meetings and things we have to get done within that frame.
Okay.
Questions?
You could update me, things have changed with the election dates for referendum. Is it only the spring and fall general elections that we can do this at, or can you do it in a primary?
Yeah, there's a slide in your handout that shows you the upcoming dates. It's after the budget reduction slide. It shows you the upcoming dates. Obviously for, the 24, it's the fall, August, but I shouldn't say nobody. There was like one last 2 years ago. Because nobody pays attention to you over the summer. The it's kind of hard to inform people over the summer, so people just don't use August unless it's kind of an emergency thing. So you'd be looking at the fall 24, November 5, and then your adoption and file resolutions, means to the municipalities by the 27th of August. And then you can see in 25, you have the spring, but there are no fall. Again, in odd years.
So that was strategic. That's why I wanted to do fall, so that if it doesn't pass, we have another shot at it in the spring.
Now, it wouldn't allow you to add dollars for 24, 25, but it would allow you to add dollars
For the following
year for 25, 26 for the April.
So I will add revenue limit to the data that we already have. And I will let you know what the assumptions were that went into the expenditures. In addition to, so you want more detail besides like the salaries and the health insurance and things like that, as far as the assumptions go?
Well, you had in the last one, you had like the transportation and you had, I can't remember all that you had, but I tried to put a list together in an Excel sheet and say, here's what it was in, I think, February when you sent that last one out, and here's what they are now.
Okay,
So I can just see from model to model what's changing.
okay, all right. Yep, no problem. And if you think of something else that you want to see, just feel free to let me know. I'll get that to you.
And obviously we'll continue to work with Mike and
Mhm.
there's some bear, if we get questions or things come up, we've got that resource, which is a bit.
Yeah, and as far as the model, we send, if there's a significant change, we send notice out that people should go in and change their models. So it's, usually this is a pretty quiet time of the year, but if there is anything that we're hearing, we keep everybody uses the model up to date.
I did think one other question earlier that I was gonna ask about, all you can do right now is use the $325 per pupil increase going forward, but there's really no way that's gonna last for 400 years. I think the next, if not before, the next Republican governor will, if he's got a majority in the legislature, can change that, right, through another budget
Well,
process.
I guess to be honest, I know it's running long, but I was surprised there was a suit brought, because to me, 325 isn't enough for
Yeah.
the vast majority of school districts. So if you didn't want to see your taxes go up much, I think you'd take the 325 and be happy.
I don't know what they're arguing about.
Right.
Yeah.
And probably not the dollar amount, the procedural issue is probably what's generating the lawsuit. But yeah, I would think, man, if you could lock in 325, if you didn't want your taxes to go up today, I'd take that all day. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Have you gotten any applications in?
Should we wait until?
Yeah. All right,
All right.
any other questions? No,
Thanks,
thank
Mike.
you.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
meet
Mike.
I appreciate it.
No problem, anytime.
All right, then I can
Anytime.
adjourn our meeting as of 6:41 PM. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great night, Oriole Nation.
Thanks, Mike.